the story to start with. We're going to talk about some mountain folks in a minute, so I'm going to tell you about this Eastern Kentucky mountaineer that was involved in an accident. Claimed to be seriously hurt, so the insurance company took him to court. Lawyer got him on the stand. He said, "Did you state immediately following the accident that you never felt better in your life?" This old boy says, "Well, I got up that morning and I hitched my mule up to the wagon," and the lawyer said, "Never mind all that. What I want to know is, did you or did you not state that you never felt better in your life?" So the boy says, "I'm coming to that part." He says, "I hitched my mule up to the wagon, I put the hound dog in the back, had just started down the road when this car come roaring over the hill and hit the wagon. Knocked the mule over on one side of the road, knocked my hound dog over on the other, pinned me underneath the wagon. So in a few minutes, the police come up there, and that guy walked up and he looked at my mule laying there in the ditch and seen his leg was broke, pulled out his pistol and he shot him, put him out of his misery. Walked over the other side of the road, looked at my hound dog laying there, seen he was in a world of hurt, shot him in the head. He walked over and looked at me laying underneath that wagon. He said, 'How you doing on time?' And I did for a fact that I ain't never felt better in my entire life." I'm tickled to death to be here at the History and Genealogical Conference because this story is both. I had heard all of my life that my dad's uncle, a man by the name of Barry Howard, married my grandfather's sister, is the guy that shot William Gobel. And that's all I knew about it. Well, one day about 25 years ago, I wandered in the Kentucky Library and Archives in Frankfort, and I stumbled across the trial transcript of Barry Howard's murder trial for shooting William Gobel. And the more I read of that trial transcript, the more I kept saying, "I can't believe this. This can't be so." So I started reading and researching other things, and to make a long story short, end result was this. 25 years ago. A year and a half ago, I was discussing my next project with my publisher, and he said, "Well, Assassination of the State has been out of print for what?" I said, 20 years. He said, "Why don't you redo that? That's much too valuable a piece of history to just let that go in the first place. In second place, you're a better writer now than you were then. Won't you redo that?" And I thought, well, that's interesting. So, end result is this. And Doug was right. I'm a much better writer and a much better researcher than I was 25 years ago. This is 65,000 words. This one's more like 110, just with additional information that I found out. Also, my friend John Snell, who is a fabulous photographer, is a better photographer than he was 25 years ago. That picture there, this is in the Frankfort Cemetery. Not only did he get that sunburst coming over William Gobel's shoulder, but the full picture in the book, you can read everything that's carved into the base of that statue. So, here we go. Our martyr governor, which is, in my opinion, a joke. This story rightly begins in 1859, when Charles S. Moorhead, who was a populist, went out of the governor's office. He was replaced by a Democrat. This is in the precursor to the Civil War. A Democrat occupied the governor's office for the next 9 terms, 36 years. So the Democrats got to thinking that they owned the governor's office. Well, lo and behold, in 1895, people in those days used the terminology when Kentucky goes Republican the way somebody today might say when hell freezes over. In 1895, William O. Bradley, Kentucky's first Republican governor, was elected, and this ticked the Democrats off. The following year, Kentucky went for the Republican presidential candidate, William McKinley, rather than William Jennings Bryan, and this really ticked the Democrats off. So they said, "You know what, we got to do something about this." Gee, I missed my pointer. That's William Gobel in the black hat there. And that smirk on his face tells you a whole lot that you need to know about William Gobel. I'll do this two-handed. Y'all bear with me a second. Because I like the pointer. That's William Gobel right there. That smirk on his face just says, "Man, I am too cool for school." He thought that he had an inherent right to be governor of Kentucky. Nothing whatsoever was going to stand in his way. He didn't care about the politics. He didn't care about anybody's rights. He was just going to be the governor of Kentucky. So, this just reiterates what I just said, that William O'Bradley, William O'Bradley was elected in 1895. He went in office in 96, and then the next year they went for the Republican presidential candidate. Democrats said, we got to do something about this. So, William Gobel, being the Senate Majority Leader, ramrodded through the state legislature an act to reform elections, which in actuality was an insurance policy to make sure that the Democrats were going to be in whatever party was in power, would remain in power forever. It had a number of provisions, the main one of which was a 3-member election board would be appointed by the legislature, and they had final authority over all election questions. Their rulings were, quote, final and conclusive. Now think about what that means. We got these 3 guys here appointed by the legislature. Any election question whatsoever comes up, they don't answer to anybody. They don't answer to the governor, they don't answer to the legislature, they don't answer to the voters, they don't answer to anybody. They can rule anything they want to, throw out any votes they wanted to, say this candidate's campaign was not legal, whatever they wanted to do. Okay, so then we appoint 3 good solid gold Democrats and said, I guess we got that taken care of. Well, that's the first time that when I found out, I said, come on, they actually did that. I know that everybody in this room's heard the term yellow dog Democrat. I'm going to tell you where it came from. William Gobel was universally disliked by everybody. He wasn't a back-slapping, baby-kissing politician, couldn't speak, public speaker worth a damn. He was a backroom deal maker. And he got to where he was, and he got everything he got by reneging on those deals. He'd say, all right, you do this for me, and I'll do something for you. But then you do for me, and he wouldn't do for you, because he'd say to you, all right, now you do this for me, and then he'd break that deal. Everybody hated him. So, when William Gobel got the Democratic nomination, the party split. And there was a faction called the Honest Election Democrats. A man by the name of Ted Hallam was making a speech in Bowling Green for the Honest Election Democrats. John Y. Brown was their candidate. And somebody in the audience jumped up and said, wait a minute here. Aren't you the man who said in Louisville 3 weeks ago that if the Democratic Party in convention assembled nominated the yellow dog for governor, you'd support it? Well, everybody thought that was pretty funny. They went wild. Well, Ted let the place calm down a little bit. He said, I did in fact say 3 weeks ago at the convention in Louisville that if the Democratic Party of Kentucky nominated the yellow dog for governor, I'd support it. But, Ted said, won't go no lower than that. So it gave us a good election comment, slogan, and also tells us a lot about how they felt about William Gobel. I love these political cartoons, and I used them for chapter headings in my book because this is just as succinct as it can possibly be. You can see that this is labeled William Gobel. That is the governorship. He's got him a safety net here just in case. But guess what? The Republican, William S. Taylor, won the election, and is even more of a surprise, the Gobel Election Board certified that result. And so the Republican slate was inaugurated in December of 1899. And the Republicans were just chortling, they got done with their own rope here. The decisions of the election board are final and conclusive. Now, William Gobel, being William Gobel, went back to the state legislature, amended the Gobel election law to say that if the election is contested, the election commission does not have the final say-so. After all, the state legislature does. As Dave Barry used to say, I am not making this up. So, next day, William Gobel contests the election and throws it in the hands of the legislature. And I think this is the funniest one of them all. Here's William Gobel. Here's Taylor in the governor's chair, and Gobel's using the state legislature to try to pry him out of there. Those cartoons are great. Well, it's the Republicans' turn to say, well, wait a minute here. We're not going to stand still for this. So, They organized what came to be known as the Mountain Army. Some 1,200 strong. They arrived in Frankfurt on January 25th, armed to the teeth, and they occupied the Capitol grounds. They put up tents and camped out on the Capitol grounds. Their intent was to say to the state legislature, wait a minute, we can't be having this. This is ridiculous. Well, they milling around out there all week. This is January 25th now. Most of them went home a couple of days later, but 300 or 400 of them hung around Frankfurt for a week or so. And they were milling around the Capitol grounds, and there's what it looked like in 1900. This is the state executive office building. That's where the governor's office was. I want you to take note of this here. This is the Capitol building, and I want you to take a good hard look at the front of that because I'm going to give you a quiz. There's a fountain there. That building burned in the 1920s. It's called the Agricultural Building. So if you go today, you won't see that one. But there's John's picture of what it looks like today. And again, I want you to take special note of these two windows here are in what was the Secretary of State's office. Here's the state capitol. And that's about all we can see in that view. Okay, as William Gobel was going in to testify before the legislature to try to browbeat them into appointing him as governor on the morning of January 30th, some gunshots rang out. At that time, there was no agreement about how many shots there were or where they came from. Now, we reenacted this on January 30th, 2000. And there was about, I don't know, 100 of us standing around outside. And all of a sudden there's some gunshots. And Jim Clotter, the state historian, was standing next to me, fell to the ground. And he said something. So that afternoon they quizzed everybody, how many shots did you hear? I heard 3 shots. Some people heard 2. There was one guy there that heard 11 shots, believe it or not. So much for eyewitness testimony. What did he say? Well, I was the only one that had an opinion because he was standing while he was laying on the ground right next to me. So I said what I thought he said. So they asked Clotter what he said, and he said, well, I was supposed to have said. He wasn't even sure that he followed the script. So eyewitness testimony is worth nothing. Here's a picture from the Cincinnati Enquirer, and this is pretty accurate. There's the fountain that we saw a minute ago. William Gobel was in that neighborhood there when he got shot. There's the windows over there that the Democrats became absolutely, positively determined that they were going to prove the shot came from that window. And here's some people coming out of the Capitol building. Within 15 minutes, yes, sir.
When did they come to the conclusion they had 100% proof? I mean, did they ever say it?
Don't be getting ahead of
Okay, all
right. Stay tuned. This picture was taken within 4 hours of the shooting, not seen the light of day for 100 years till I found it, and I'm tickled to death. If you think this wasn't serious business, look at that. They had cannon and Gatling guns out there because they were afraid the Republicans were holed up inside the executive office building. They were afraid that the Democrats were going to storm the place and try to kill them all, take the state offices by storm. So this was serious business. As I said in my book, if somebody had set off a firecracker out there, we'd had another civil war on our hands. I'm delighted I found these pictures. There's a plaque in the ground. Anybody been there? They didn't tell you what I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
There's a plaque in the sidewalk there, and here's what it says. And every time I look at that, I wonder if he slipped on the ice or what. Somebody told me the other day when I was doing this that they were there and they saw a young man out there and he looked at that plaque and he's looking all around, and the guy went over and asked him, what are you doing? He said, well, did he fall out of a tree or what? All right, 10 days after the shooting, they found a bullet hole in a hackberry tree on the left of that walkway. Found a bullet hole in a tree. Well, I didn't believe that for a second when I first read it. I was living out in the country in Mercer County. I had a lot of hackberry trees on my property. I went out there and I drove a stick in the ground and I aimed right at the top of the stick at a hackberry tree over there. I didn't want to put a mark on the tree because that would make it too easy. I shot at the tree. I went over there and looked. I didn't see no bullet hole. Well, maybe I missed a tree. So I went back and shot at it again, and instantly, I knocked a chunk of bark off the side of the tree about an inch and a half in diameter, and it was stark white, whereas the rest of the tree was gray. So I went back and I looked again, and I saw where I hit the tree the first time dead on. The bullet went straight in. I would never, ever have found that bullet hole. But the second time, I hit over on the side of the tree and knocked a chunk of bark off, and it was perfectly obvious. So, like everything else, I didn't prove a damn thing. Okay, here you go. The state of Kentucky hired a civil engineer to draw this chart. You will notice these lines all intersect here. There happened to be somebody standing there who lined up on this bush, the shot where William Gobel fell. Somebody standing over here lined it up on that bush. Somebody standing over here lined it up on that. Somebody standing here and somebody inside of there. And lo and behold, they all converge on that spot, which is precisely where that plaque in the sidewalk is this very day. This is the hackberry tree where they found the bullet. And you will notice that on a direct line from the Secretary of State's office window, right over that spot, lo and behold, if it doesn't line up perfectly. Now, there's a couple of problems with this chart, one of which is I said I was going to give you a quiz. Anybody see a problem? Well, the fountain's in the way, and we'll do that in just a second. But I asked y'all to take a good hard look at the front of that building. There ain't no windows in front of that building. There it is. Now, I asked John to get down on the ground. They found that bullet in the hackberry tree 18 inches above the ground. I asked John to get down there, and this picture is taken. This is the exact view that you would have from where that bullet was in that hackberry tree. Here's the window. Now that tree right there, there's a plaque on it that says it was planted there by the DAR in 1937, so it wasn't there in 1900. But there's no windows in front of that building, so nobody could possibly have lined that up from in there. And I'm going to tell you folks, I got one college degree in math and one in computer science. I went over there and I measured everything, and I put all the trigonometry and calculus and physics that I know to work on it, and I'm going to tell you that there ain't no way that a bullet fired from that window would have made it over that hump in the ground. Having gone through William Gobel at the height that the autopsy report said it did, not physically possible. Well,
could they have been standing behind those pillars?
It's possible. Anything's possible. But I won't get too far ahead of myself. Well, I will say that now. I am absolutely positively convinced that that bullet they found in the hackberry tree was fired from the Secretary of State's office window. And his name was Caleb Powers. They were determined to hang it on Caleb Powers. No question in my mind that that bullet was fired from Caleb Powers' office window. When? I don't know. I found no evidence whatsoever that that is the bullet that killed William Gobel. That bullet's in a museum in Georgetown. It's got DNA on it. We can prove if it is or not, but that ain't going to happen. Well, then, anyway, they picked William Gobel up, they carried him off. He was staying in the Capitol Hotel up the street. The state legislature, Democrats only, met in secret session that night and declared that back in November of 1899, William Gobel had indeed been elected legally governor. So they called in a judge to inaugurate him. The Republicans immediately declared that he was dead when they gave him the oath of office. Maybe. It is a fact that nobody ever outside that hotel room ever saw him alive again.
So where were the Republicans when the Democrats met?
The Republican governor had declared the legislature out of session and said, we will congregate in London. And the Democrats needed to say, we ain't going to London. So all the Republicans had gone to London. The Democrats didn't bother to tell them about it anyway. They held a secret meeting, which is illegal, in the Capitol Hotel that night and declared William Gobel as governor.
They can't do that.
They did. I'm not making this up. You're right. Every newspaper in the state, you got to take what's in the newspaper with a grain of salt. every newspaper in the state in those days, and maybe still today, was a Democrat or a Republican organ, one or the other, and you might, this is pretty subtle, but you might be able to glean there what happened. Notice that his last words were, "Doctor, I forgive them, they were not the ones." But a couple of days later, the Democrats had officially decided that his last words were, "Tell my friends to be brave, fearless, and loyal to the great common people." And if you go to the old Capitol in Frankfurt, you will find that carved in the base of that statue. Well, there was a man named Irvin S. Cobb, who was a reporter for a Louisville newspaper at the time. It was his job to cover the Gobel campaign, knew more about William Gobel than anybody alive. Cobb said the instant he heard that, he didn't believe it for a second, because in the first place, William Gobel was much too intelligent to use two consecutive words that meant the same thing. In the second place, he cared less about the great common people. And in the third place, to quote Cobb, the son of a bitch didn't have no friends. So Cobb decided that he would investigate the situation and find out what the deal was, and it turns out that the dying man was begging the doctors for his favorite meal. And they figured, well, he's gonna die anyway, we might as well let him have it. And so, according to Cobb, William Gobel put it in his mouth and spit it out and said, "Doc, that was a damn bad oyster," and died. They did not carve a damn bad oyster in the base of that statue. Here is said statue. Not even the Frankfurt folks know that initially they put it at the base of the stairs. This is out in the middle of the street in front of the new Capitol. This was in 1914, I believe it was put there. In 1959, Bert Combs said, "Get that thing out of here, put it down in front of the old Capitol where it belongs, and that's where you can see it today." I'm sorry?
My great uncle was the reason I moved. He got Bert Combs and moved it.
Cool. All right, so at this point, we got dual administrations. We got a Republican governor elected, we got a Democratic governor appointed, who succeeded to the office when William Gobel died. We got, and that was J.C.W. Beckham. Caleb Powers was the elected Republican Secretary of State. And this was so serious, they were meeting in the legislative halls, that if the Republicans brought in a Protestant to offer the prayer, the Republicans would bring in a Catholic. You know, this chaos. Well, they sued each other mutually over who was in fact the rightful state government. And they consolidated the cases, and they were heard in district court in Louisville. The judge actually declared that he didn't have any authority to overrule what the state legislature had done. So he said, I can't rule on it. So the Republicans appealed to the federal government. William McKinley said there's no federal issues here, so they refused to intervene. It's over. Governor Taylor fled to Indiana. Okay, here's Caleb Powers, who did me the favor of writing the book, giving his side of the story. He was the newly elected Republican state. As you can see, he was a nice looking man. He was very intelligent. He was very astute. He is a rising star on the political firmament. The Democrats said, we have got to put a stop to that man's career. We can't be adding this. And that's why they were determined to prove that the shot came from his office. Now, if this wasn't so serious, it would be comical. The problem was that Caleb Powers was on the train halfway to Louisville at the time of the shooting. So they couldn't hang the shooting on him. But obviously, he had just vacated to make his office available for the shooting. So there's a big conspiracy here. Okay? And so, we're going to indict him for masterminding the conspiracy. We got to have a shooter. So they picked on a man by the name of James Howard from Clay County to actually have pulled the trigger. And they had to try to establish a connection between Caleb Powers and Jim Howard, and they couldn't because there wasn't none. But they appointed a man by the name of Henry Yahtzee, who was a clerk in the state government, to be the go-between. So they invited Caleb Powers, they invited Jim Howard, they invited Henry Yahtzee, and 37 other people. 37. How many of them you think were Republicans?
Oh,
37, including my dad's uncle, Barry Howard. They tried Caleb Powers and convicted him 4 times, did not have a shred of evidence. Caleb Powers was, in my opinion, as innocent as you and me. Now, you want to know how can they convict him 4 times? Nobody ever heard of quadruple jeopardy? Well, they would convict him, and I'll show you some of the evidence they used in a minute. And then the appeals court would look at it and say, oh, you ain't sending a man to prison based on this. So, try him again. Well, for the next 20 years, every time there was a gubernatorial election coming up, they'd try him again, or Henry Yeltsin, or Jim Howard. These trials went on for 20 years. This man's name is Rob Franklin. He was the Commonwealth's attorney and seemed to be a decent fellow. But it was his job to prosecute these people regardless of what the evidence was. And I put this in here because, you know, every story that I research and write about, somewhere along the line, it comes home to me that this really did happen to real life people. Well, when John and I were in the Frankfurt Cemetery to picture that statue that we started with, I wandered by the gravestone of Robert B. and Mary Frank. Well, that's it. And over behind it was this that lists the names of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 infant children of Rob and Mary Franklin. And some of it's while the Gobel business was going on. This did happen to real life people. Now, Henry Yeltsin that I mentioned, initially they got a deposition from him and submitted that into evidence in court. A couple of trials later, what Henry Yeltsin had said didn't suit him anymore, so they got another deposition, and you will notice that both of them are, the word I'm looking for, certified. And as I said in my book, a blind man without a cane can see that the signatures aren't the same. That's the kind of evidence that they used to convict these guys. The trials were fraught with irregularities. For one thing, the judge, who was a good, solid Gobel Democrat and is determined to convict these people as the prosecutors were, interviewed every prospective juror individually before the attorneys even got hold of it. And the first thing he asked them was, did you vote for William Gobel? If the answer to that question was no, go home, so we don't need you. Henry Yeltsin, as I said, Caleb Powers was convicted 4 times. Henry Yeltsin was convinced and sentenced to life in prison, but James Howard was tried to convict 3 times. Now I got to tell you about Henry Yeltsin, who was evidently a very weak personality. His trial was held in Georgetown, and there was a witness on the stand testifying to a conversation he had had with Henry Yeltsin in Franklin County Jail. Henry Yeltsin jumped up out of his chair and he screamed, "That is a damned lie. I never said a word to that man in my entire life." The judge, who, as I said, is a good, solid Gobel Democrat, said, quote, "Mr. Sheriff, if that man don't behave himself, you put a pair of handcuffs on him." Henry Yeltsin screamed, "I will not stand here and let them lie my life away." He collapsed on the floor, unconscious. Henry Yeltsin's lawyer says, quote, "Your Honor, I think we're out of recess here." The judge said, quote, "Well, Counselor, I guess you are due a postponement." This is the funniest part of the whole thing to me. The lawyer said, quote, "I think it's due to my client here." So they recessed till 9 o'clock the next morning. Lawyer comes in, he says, "I'm sorry, my client's in coma." They recessed till 9 o'clock the next morning. Lawyer came in, he said, "I'm sorry, my client's in coma." Judge said, quote, "The Commonwealth of Kentucky's gone to a great amount of trouble to assemble us all here at this venue. Bring that man in here. We will proceed with the trial." They carried him in there on a brass bed from the hotel, him laying there with his arms across his chest, set the bed down in front of the courtroom, put the lawyer back on the stand. The judge said, "All right, now where were we when we were so rudely interrupted the other day?" They tried Henry Yeltsin, they convicted him, he sentenced him to life in prison, him in a coma. I ain't making this up.
Good acting job.
Yeah? Well, yeah, he was faking it. So, brings us to the conclusion, who shot William Gobel? The consensus of everybody that's ever looked at it is Henry Outsey. I'm not convinced that Henry Outsey had the guts to do it, but of the people we know, he is the most likely candidate. So, let me tell you, let me hike my book here just a little bit. And by the way, I got some back there I'd love to, as well as a sampling of my other books. I'd love to sell everybody here 3 or 4 copies. Here's the last paragraph of Caleb Powers' book. Caleb Powers spent 8 years in prison, innocent as you and me, without anything that even smelled like a fair trial. Here's the last paragraph of his book. I know that a tremendous force resides in innocence and that truth and justice, sometimes slowly, but always surely, are marching on to victory. They may often tread with leaden heels and fail to arrive in time to prevent the havoc wrought in the abuse of their name. But they rarely fail, finally. But whatever fate befalls me, I shall have in the end, as I have now, the consolation of knowing that someday, my name at least, will be vindicated. So for my last sentence, I said, all right, Caleb, so this one's for you. I've done all in my power in hopes of getting you that long overdue vindication. So, I hope y'all got questions for me. I love the quiz. This is my favorite part. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that Yeltsin guy, now, what was his title?
He was an auditor in, a clerk in the auditor's department, just a state employee. He was absolutely scared to death that if the if the Democrats came in, he was going to lose his state job. So he did, in fact, try to hire several people to shoot William Gobel.
Yahtzee is also secretary, was gonna be the secretary to the new governor.
Well, that's speculation.
I was told he was gonna be the secretary to the new governor.
Henry Outsey did not appeal his conviction, and the Democrats saw that as an admission of guilt. He spent 20 years in prison. At the time, he was the word I'm looking for, had served more continuous time in Kentucky State Prison than any other prisoner.
Where was the state militia during all of this? You had, why didn't they stop there, I guess is my question.
Well, you mean the trials?
No, after Gobel was assassinated, why didn't they stop the meeting, stop them from being appointed?
Well, they couldn't legally do so. We had 2 attorney generals who was the commander of the militia. We had a Democrat one and a Republican one. And it so happens that they were both Masons. And so they shook hands and agreed, we're not going to get into the politics of this. We're not going to use a political army to make anything happen. We're just going to maintain order as well as we can. So they didn't interfere with the politics.
I heard that the governor, they called him Halljaw.
Yeah.
Halljaw Taylor was locked in his office
Yeah.
with men surrounding it,
Yep.
so they couldn't get to him.
Yeah, for a little while, not for very
So
long.
he had his own men or something, right?
Yeah, but the Democrats have an army as well, and they could have forced something too if they'd have wanted to. But they agreed to let politics take its course rather than use military might to settle anything. I told y'all this is a hell of a story. Yes, sir.
So, going back, I guess, a little bit in Gobel's time, did you do any research or to the, I guess when he was in Covington, the shootout that he had on Madison?
Some.
What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's just an example of how Kentucky gentlemen of the day settled their differences. One of the most interesting things I found out, the man he shot, as I'm sure you know, his name was William Sanford. John Sanford. Sanford's wife sued William Gobel for $100,000 for wrongful death. And after some legal wrangling, that eventually all came to nothing. So, basically they just said, well, Bill, you're a good boy, go home, don't worry about it.
I got pictures of the Sanford family
Cool.
from the descendants of his daughter married John Sanford was in the Civil War, and, anyway, the daughter married a big abolitionist from New York named Erlanger. And he was the founder of it. He founded the NAACP, which is an interesting story.
Now, he was shot, was it in the chest?
We can go,
Yeah.
the bullet went in between, according to the autopsy
Because
report.
they had his vest and his hat and stuff that he was wearing.
Yeah.
And,
It's still in the museum in Franklin.
yeah.
According to the autopsy report, the bullet entered his body 54 inches above his heel, which is how I know that it would not have made it over that hump in the ground, between his right nipple and his armpit. It came out on the left of his spine, almost 2 inches lower than the entrance room, which means that bullet was at a much steeper angle than it would have been from Caleb Tower's office window, because the fall from that window to where they found that bullet in the hackberry tree is 1 inch per foot.
So you believe he was higher, whoever was higher up in that building?
If the shot came from that building, it was obviously from the second or third floor,
Okay.
according to the angle through that the autopsy report said it went through him.
I was just curious, what time of day was he shot?
As I recall, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. The
Oh, okay.
legislature was just about to come in session.
It looks like you've read a lot of books. Or
Well-
the one book that you were talking about a minute ago, is that your latest book?
Well, the new assassination
That's-
thing
that's
is
good.
is my latest book.
It looks like you got pretty good variety there.
It's got to have something to do.
That's true, that's true. But
It's-
it is actually an interesting story though,
It is.
very
Okay.
interesting story.
It should be a movie.
Absolutely. And I got a couple of others here that, since you gave me the opportunity, I'll brag on. This is the story of the 1950, 48, 49, 50 Kentucky basketball team. I read in the paper 30 years ago that C.M. Newton had asked Ralph Beard, who was one of the major players, to come to UK to talk to Rick Pitino's basketball team. And I presumed that what he was going to say was, boys, don't screw up your life like I did. So I called him and I said, Mr. Beard, if you'd love to tell the world that story, God, I would love to write it. Nope, can't do it, won't do it. I begged, I cried, I pleaded. He wouldn't do it. So I forgot about it. And about 3 years ago, having learned how research is done, I discovered that Ralph Beard left about 25 or 30 hours worth of oral interviews at UK Special Collections, so he did tell me about it after all. And these books are kind of like choosing between your children, but this, I'll show you, is the story of a young man named Franklin Sousley who was from Kenton County, Kentucky. He was one of the Marines that raised the flag on Iwo Jima. This is Franklin's high school graduation picture. That's him right there.
Listen,
Well, wait just a second, I'll let you see it.
okay.
Because here's what this story is about. This is Franklin's mother. He was killed on Iwo Jima about a month after this picture was taken. His mother spent the rest of her life trying to get recognition for him. If you will take a good close look at this picture was taken in 1985. Her son's 40 years dead. And you can still see what you see on her face. Pride,